chapter 8 and cover the years from 1928 to 1945. I'm Curtis Manning, a professor of history here at the college, and so I'll be giving this. This, as most of you know, was set out to be a collaborative effort to go through St. Bernard history chronologically, and it's very important, very informal. So anytime that I make a mistake, or if you know of something that could be added, all that kind of stuff, please do not hesitate to let me know. I want you to do that, because I actually received some very good input from the last time, which I appreciated. So I want to, that's the whole point of this. I don't consider myself an expert on all this, and so with all of us together, we can get a good running start for more research later. Also, this video will be available online afterwards, just like the last time. What I did do, however, is I put a password on it, just as a speaker's choice. So anybody that wants to see it, all of us insiders here, by all means, I would provide the password to anybody, or anybody that you thought might want to see it. Right. That's the only little thing. Same with the last one as well. When last we left our story, we were probably in the most momentous historical chapter of St. Bernard, which included from 1921 to 1928, which included the Rum Murders and the Trappers' War and the Great Flood of 1927. And so we're going to continue on with that. The great prosperity of the 1920s then in St. Bernard kind of gave way to the Great Flood, and then almost immediately to the Great Depression in the 1930s, which is where we're going to take up the story today. And upon further review, it was pointed out that I kind of might have given a wrong impression of the trapping era last time. That really the trapping era in St. Bernard is going to continue full force until the 1950s. And so I might have given the impression last time what I intended to do was say that the great prosperity of the 1920s, where a trapper could make as much as the governor, and a lot of them did in the short trapping season, that huge boom went down with lesser demand in the 1930s, the Great Depression, all that. But trapping, as being a very prosperous occupation, is going to continue through the 1940s, and we'll talk about that today. And another issue that that came up in the last lecture, I did some research, and I did discover that I was absolutely 100% correct on the pronunciation of pecan. And so what I would like for y'all to do then, we came on that, so from now on, I'm expecting y'all to pronounce that correctly from now on. Right, all right, so those are just the lingering issues.
What about crayfish?
That did not come up. I have to do more research of that. So, and I'll be able to tell my story of that later if you remind me of being an outsider with a...
We'll discuss that.
Which is kind of fun. All right, so...
I remain unmoved.
We do have our general approach that is emerging as a storyline throughout all of our chapters. And first is the division of St. Bernard into 3 geographical areas, which will continue. And I'm finding that, I think we'll find tonight, that it's almost like 3 different stories going on simultaneously. And we'll see tonight that Lower St. Bernard, for the first time, is where the action is, where that's going to be the high point. But of course, if those who've been around, you see that at different places at different times are more important than others. And also interestingly, there are other 2 themes that really connect all the way through. One being this connection to New Orleans, especially the trading part, and also hurricanes really take a back seat during this time period. A few of the things happen, but really not a lot of mention. And in fact, it was interesting to me that the hurricanes especially really seemed to take a break from St. Bernard and let Lower St. Bernard have its high time unimpeded. So I thought that's kind of an interesting part. As far as this chapter, we'll see that within from 1928 to 1945, there are really 2 distinct eras. One is going to be the Great Depression of the 1930s, which is a bad time throughout. And the second one is going to be the World War II era, which is actually a pretty prosperous time. We'll see that in general, In the Great Depression nationally, put into a national context, just won't spend a lot of time on that. The Great Depression, the 1930s in America, challenged America more than it ever in its history. It had been a time when really even the core American values, the American exceptionalisms of capitalism, democratic rights, a lot of other things, it was actually thought that model was broken. That America did so badly, it seemed like other models were better. And so kind of that crisis of confidence for the first time. I always tell my students that voting with your feet, we're in a free society, people will go to those places that give them the most opportunities. Often it's economic, but also for religious freedoms and political freedoms and other things. And it's a very good gauge. And in America, more people throughout all of American history, immigrants, had come to America, often than all the rest of the world combined, voting with their feet. There are only 2 instances in American history where more people left America than came to it. One was during the Great Depression, right? So it shows kind of a breaking, and at times other models worldwide, this is the 1930s. So things like Nazism under Adolf Hitler, fascism under Mussolini, alternate models seem to be much better, at least more prosperous economically. They're being tried around. So as a bad time nationally, in Louisiana, it's going to be important because it's going to be the time of Huey Long. And what he said, our good friend Huey Long, he only has kind of tangential power in St. Bernard, though he was important. So we're not going to talk about him too much, but absolutely important in the state, and in my opinion, very integral to national affairs as well. He's going to bring in kind of a politics for the average person in Louisiana, but also nationally. I think he had a good shot at being president if he would not have been assassinated, if not in 1936, maybe in the next election. So, but who knows what would happen, but he was assassinated before that could happen. Very influential. I just put he's key in almost all of history in Louisiana. I just put these on here because this picture on the left seems just very nerd-like to me and very un-Huey Long. It seemed very, very strange, even though that was the picture I put on my book, History of Higher Education, which is also very important. But it's this other picture that I think kind of captures that. So some of that is going to filter into the politics of St. Bernard and be important, but mostly at the state level. Also, very interestingly, the Great Depression is going to be felt everywhere, but it wasn't really felt that much in all of Louisiana, just because Louisiana was so poor and economically backwards before. It didn't make that much of a difference. Right. So kind of good and bad. So what we'll talk about, still it affected some, all right? But it just wasn't an effect. In fact, Huey Long is going to bring a lot of the basic things like textbooks for school children, build roads, where roads have not been before, some of those things for the first time. All right. And then a little bit later on nationally, the Great Depression, the World War II, a hugely prosperous time for the nation. During the 1930s, the Great Depression, there have been great efforts by Franklin Roosevelt to get America out of the Great Depression. None of them worked. Approaching 1938, he was trying to put in a third New Deal because nothing had worked before. All right, America was still in the Depression. However, it's going to be the starting of World War II. Of course, it started in 1939 or before, depending on how you do it, in Europe. We don't get into it until 1941, but the providing materials, at first for our allies in Europe, but later on, it'll be absolutely full employment for wartime materials in 1941 to 45. So that's what brings America out of the Great Depression. And after World War I, America is going to have the world to ourselves pretty much. All of our great competitors are floored. So there's just this incredible prosperity from 1941 through at least the 1970s based on that. All right, so, and we're going to see for St. Bernard history, it didn't matter that much except for some of the industry, but mostly the movements of people. So we're going to talk about things that I'm calling the intrusions of modernity, of modern things. But for St. Bernard Parish then, it's going to be the movement of the soldiers who are going to serve pretty good numbers and leave, kind of isolate St. Bernard, go see the wide world and come back, which will bring a more modern life, but also the movement of job seekers. Huge movement in California and other places nationally, but a lot of the St. Bernard folks are going to go to either Upper St. Bernard from the lower ones, or New Orleans, or further for the great jobs that are available. So the World War I for St. Bernard, the biggest effect is just going to be the introducing of new outside things, which is not going to change life during this chapter, but it's going to change it greatly afterwards. All right, so moving then to Lower St. Bernard in the 1930s, which is the Great Depression era. And in Lower St. Bernard, it's got the big question, big historical question of life is going to come to a head. And so this is this idea that in middle and Lower St. Bernard at this point, this is Layno culture, which was very insular, Spanish-speaking, had not changed much, is what I'm going to call primitive but prosperous, meaning it's really based in the land and not a lot of modern things. And so this has been going on since after the Civil War. It's a very slow-moving thing. But in Middle St. Bernard and then Lower St. Bernard, the people are going to be faced with what is probably the biggest story in American history, which is the assimilation of immigrants. The idea, do we hang on to our culture and all that's good and bad about it, or do we kind of take on, assimilate into the American culture and what's good and bad about that? And there's no big answer, but it's just dealing with these things. Different parts of St. Bernard are going to deal with them at a different time. We're going to see that in the Lower St. Bernard, this is what I'm calling leaning into modernity. And so it's an idea of keeping the more primitive culture, which had a lot of good things, or getting electricity, going for better jobs, the conveniences of American life. And it's a very gradual thing. Different people did different times, but they're grasping at that. In this period of Lower St. Bernard in the 30s and 40s, is going to choose not to lean towards modernity, but to lean away, to keep this culture intact, which we'll talk about. And it's actually going to turn out to be a very good choice, because the Great Depression and the horrible economic considerations was very bad for the modern American at the time. Right. So it's going to be a very good choice to lean away from modernity in Lower St. Bernard. But of course, those very same choices that made it a very good thing during this chapter, in coming chapters, it's really going to hit home. And we'll talk about it when the time comes. So in Delacroix, which is kind of the main part of Lower St. Bernard at this time, it's still a very good, prosperous time. There's not a need for a lot of money to buy stuff when you have everything you need, and the land itself can generate the money even at this time. Delacroix is going to be very successful. It's going to have its high point in the 1940s, but also the other towns of Lower St. Bernard, Reggio, Ryclosky, Shell Beach, Oakdale, though they had come around like just after 1900 and become established, they're going to become successful as well for a lot of the same reasons. The Delacroix especially had been held by an influx of Spanish immigrants, basically Spanish people coming to the ports of New Orleans, jumping ship, being illegal immigrants of the early time, making it to Delacroix. And then apparently before then, if you could make it for 7 years, that was long enough to be able to stay. All right. So up until the 1920s, when the immigration laws changed, there had been a continued growth with that, but also it kind of contributed, as you can well imagine, to Delacroix being a very insular society, not liking strangers who might come in to look for some of this kind of thing, but also being very proud of the culture and not having a need to look too far else because it's very self-sufficient. So, but this immigration is going to stop, but it continued on, absolutely Spanish-speaking at this time. If a stranger came to Delacroix, very suspicious, people would go up to them go up to them and say, what's your business? If they had business with a new people, left alone otherwise, not a worry. And also interestingly, in the 1920s and 30s, it was very difficult, or it didn't happen much, for somebody from Delacroix and Lower St. Bernard to marry into a different nationality other than Spanish. Of course, I put quotation around nationality, because being American would be a different nationality. Right? So it's just part of this good and bad of this kind of insular content culture that kind of continued on. Being not from here and just knowing those areas fairly recently, I was very surprised at this. Farming continued in Delacroix up until the 1930s. And so we're going to see that there were houses and businesses or whatever 3 deep on both sides of the bayou. And there are other high areas, as they talk about, you take your mule by P-Rod or some other boat to the places where you do farm. So of course we're going to see, and the whole Bayou Terrebonne is fresh water, and we're going to see that another one of our stories of land loss and all the way to what we have today is going to continue. There wasn't an issue at this time, and there are lots of oak forests and bears and all that kind of stuff. It's really wild area, but lots of high land, and that's from this time on is going to continue and go down. All right, so we also talked about what I'm calling the intrusions of modernity. The first road to Delacroix is going to be built in the 1930s. Before then, everything had to get there by boat, obviously. And so you can well imagine my theme from this time on, when I'm talking about intrusions of modernity, is not really going to happen until after, like the 1950s or later. But this kind of insular, self-sufficient, prosperous society, as these new modern things, if you can't get out except by boat, it's hard to do. Now you start driving in and out, you have more connections to the outside. Step by step, these things are going to start happening. Still at this time, trapping, muskrat trapping is a very big deal. I'm pretty sure back then, I don't know if maybe somebody correct me too, the season for, this is kind of what trapping was like. We talked a lot about it in the last time too, about it really got going for real in the 1920s and a little bit before. But a typical, and it continued on in the 30s, the typical season was, I think, from about November to January. I know in 1974 it was November 11th to February 1st, and so I think it was about the same during the cold weather months. We'll see. I do want to say that the continuation of trapping, remember the last part of our story, a great flood of 1927 hit, inundated much of the trapping lands. Manu Malero actually received very good payments, about $1.5 million, and some of the reparations parts. And then, and kind of by that, he used a lot of that, some of that whatever, to kind of keep the muskrat population, to keep the trapping going, to build barges for the muskrats, and to kind of subsidize a lot of this, continue on. And of course, he's going to play, because of the land holdings and other, he's going to play a key role in the trapping industry all the way throughout, and to kind of keep that going. So, with the start of the season, what was it like? As soon as the weather was cold enough, so about November-ish, the trapper would go, would burn all the grass to make it easier to walk on. And then at that point, because the muskrats would be underground, so they would be affected, the three-cornered grasses would not be affected because the roots are down there. So the burn it, make it easier, and start the trapping as the shoots of the grasses started growing so that it would be eaten out, so it would be in a week or two. The entire family would go down to the camps near where the trapping was going on. And so the camps, and we'll see like a little picture where it'd be, the camp would be on Bayou Bank to make it easy for the fur buyers to come in. And so the typical hut would be 2 rooms, one of which would have kitchen, dining room, living room, bedroom. The other was a bedroom. The muskrat skins would be hung from the ceiling on stretchers drying for the whole time. There'd be a wood stove. The children would sleep 3 or 4 to a bed and would stay, the whole family would stay pretty much the entire time down there. And the family moved down a week or 2 before the trapping season started. All right, so there was quite a division of duties. The husbands and the boys would go off and set the traps, do the trapping, and each a very small male child, a very small boy, might set a trap very close to the camp, and then of course moving on, then they bring home at the end of the day all the rats that have been trapped, and the women then would prepare the skins. They ran the skin through a washer, like a clothes wringer, to get all the bits of stuff on it, and to put it on the stretchers, and then they would dry, and then of course we would take care of the camp and preparing the meals, all that kind of stuff in the division of labor, and then just kind of run it like a household kind of thing. The same day, it was every season. The only thing that interrupted it was to go back for Christmas, and we'll talk about it a little bit. So the 4 days to be able to leave this, go back to civilization, which was Delaware or some other places, to have a Christmas celebration. It was a big, big deal. And a few other times to go off to buy supplies. So yeah, it'd be like a big thing. We'll see some of the trappers. And so looking ahead then, one of my theories is going to be with this whole intrusion of modernity thing, why this was going on. There are no boat motors yet. I think they exist, but they're not used that much. So it's a family type event. However, because it takes a while to get there and bring all your stuff, a little bit later on, like in the 50s, when there are boat motors, the gasoline motors for the boats, then it starts working out where the entire family doesn't need to go to the camps. The trappers can go out, work their traps, and come back to the home, and thus be a way to do the stuff. And so then it's like this kind of a cohesive cultural family unit starts changing a little bit with these introductions of modernity, and thus the lifestyle changes. But at this time, it did not as kind of a key thing, all right? So Lower St. Bernard, 1930s, while the rest of the country, and even the rest of the parish, is doing very badly, they're doing fine, right? With their type of lifestyle, it worked out, right? Now to Middle St. Bernard, the past chapters, we've really been talking about Middle St. Bernard as St. Bernard. It's where all the action was, where political power, until last time all that changed. At this time, Middle St. Bernard in this looking to modernity thing is kind of in a tough position. Throughout the 1920s, they had looked more to Upper Parish, to the modern conveniences of New Orleans and everything, especially with the traffic of war and that kind of thing. Now, they did that, but now the Great Depression has hit. A lot of those businesses are out of business, so the jobs aren't there. The political power has changed, so they don't have that. They've moved away from some of the self-sufficient parts of the lower part of the parish. So the 1930s was kind of a bad time for Middle St. Bernard. Manuel Malero, who came to prominence last time, is going to be the main person, the leading power figure in Middle St. Bernard, and especially not so much politically, because as we see, Lower St. Bernard has lost that, but business-wise and other, he's one of the key representatives. We'll see, though, in Middle St. Bernard, the 1930s is more intrusions of modernity, which that's kind of a loaded word, intrusions, but really it's good or bad how you look at it or whatever. But it's definitely, I say intrusions because it's going to change things. Nationally, the 1930s are the times of the New Deals, of Franklin Roosevelt trying to, for the first time, bring federal government intervention to help the lives of the average person who's doing very bad. And so especially in the rural areas, my favorite part of the New Deal when I teach my regular students is to talk about the rural life of farmers, especially in the South, which is dirt poor. In the 1930s, maybe 10% of rural families, of farm families, have electricity. If you don't have electricity, you use kerosene lamps. You don't have indoor plumbing because that takes a pump. You don't have washing clothes is backbreaking labor. Very difficult without electricity. In the 1930s, most people in the South and in St. Bernard did not have electricity. New Deal programs are going to bring subsidized electricity to rural areas, and it does happen in Middle St. Bernard as well. So for the first time, there's going to be electrification, at least in Middle St. Bernard. So there are electric appliance lights. It's a very, very big deal historically to make that switch. Right? Historians have said, I happen to agree, that probably electricity is the greatest invention in all of history to improve the life of the average person. All right, so that came to Middle St. Bernard, really for most of the time. Of course, there was electricity, but not widespread. There's the Works Progress Administration, which is one of these New Deal federal things. Federal agencies is going to deepen and widen Bayou Terre-Boeuf. In 1937, provide piped water, like not well water or from the bayou or whatever, to 2,500 residents. We're going to see that St. Bernard had about 7,200 people at this time, still very small. So providing a huge increase. And also another project that I thought was very interesting, just because it seemed odd to me, I don't know why, one of these New Deal projects was to pump water from the Mississippi River into the head of the bayou Terre-Boeuf, so that there'd be a current in Bayou Terre-Boeuf, and thus it would be stagnant water, so there wouldn't be mosquitoes and all that kind of stuff.
Oh.
Which seemed like it seemed like a good idea, I guess, seemed like extra, but I imagine it would have brought a great deal of comfort to people in the bayou. So that's good. So a lot of these federal programs are going to help the average person. In culture and religion, just to kind of give an overview, there's not a big theme. So in 1928, keeping in mind it's a small parish anyway at this time, but as far as the non-modernity in the rest of the country, education is becoming important and all that. So in the parish there were 41 white, meaning at this time not African American, it was segregated at the time, but 41 white elementary school graduates, of which only 8 were Canarians or Isleños or whatever, and I don't know for sure, but I'm betting virtually all those would be from Middle St. Bernard. All right. And 0 of 9 high school graduates. So it's one thing, 9 high school graduates is very low, but these are going to be all Upper St. Bernard, which, as we've talked about in the past, are going to have the benefits of modern America and all that. As far as religion, this was just interesting because it showed the different movement of the power of the parish. That before 1941, and I don't know quite how much before, but the seat of the parish, the Catholic seat, the seat of the Catholic parish, had been the San Pedro Church, was in Reggio, and it was moved to the one in Byron. So that was just kind of, at least by 1941, I think a little bit before, I couldn't get the exact date. So the seat of the Catholic seat of the parish has moved to Violet. That kind of shows that the parish population has shifted. All right, so Violet is kind of becoming the center of what we're calling Middle St. Bernard, whereas it used to be where the St. Bernard courthouse is, or St. Bernard Village, kind of a little bit further down the road. And I thought this was funny. I don't know if this has changed too much, but I shouldn't talk like that as an outsider. But I saw a quotation that around this time, around 1941. In general, people believed in God and prayer of a sort, but many felt that attendance at Mass was not necessary. So I don't know if it's still that way today. All right, so, and then as far as the movements, at this point in the 1930s, still what I would call a trickle from one part of the parish upper or out. And so for the middle part of the parish, still not a lot of movement to the upper parish and beyond. We're going to find that World War II especially is going to energize that process. But now, it happened a little bit with World War I and the increase in the 20s, but not a huge amount. All right. So, moving on then to Upper St. Bernard in the 1930s. So Upper St. Bernard then would share most of what was going on with the country, which is to say that it was a very bad time maybe the worst of times, it was almost cruel to have the great prosperity of the 1920s to kind of allow people that prosperity, then to be hit hard by the 1930s. So the Ford assembly plant that we talked about is one of the great instances of industrialization last time. That's going to shut down 1 month after the October 1929 stock crash. And so whereas a lot of the businesses will continue on, but just at a bare minimum. Nationwide, unemployment's going to reach 25% and that kind of stuff, and it'll be similar here. And then in May 1933, there was a report of malnutrition among many of the parish youngsters, mostly in Upper St. Bernard. Down the road, parishes are going to be closer to the land and be able to provide a lot more of that stuff, which was a benefit at this time. Right? So we'll see that as far as the one of the few bright spots at this time, which is going to be an ongoing difficulty to this day, is going to be the oil and gas industry, which really gets going in the 1930s, especially as lots of oil is found in the marshes of St. Bernard and Plaquemines Parish. And so that's going to lead, and oil was also a bright spot nationally in the 1930s as well. So oil and gas is going to provide some jobs and everything, and we're going to have the start of a kind of paradox that continues to this day, where oil and gas are going to provide jobs, tax money, a lot of the parts of prosperity, especially for St. Bernard Parish, but also some of the bad sides say about, you know, the maybe not taking care of the land, not health issues, hurting some of the traditions, that kind of stuff. So the oil and gas industry is going to have just a very good and a very bad at once relationship with St. Bernard that's going to continue. We're going to talk about every single chapter, including today. Let's start back there. Yep, so we talked about all that. And then as far as politically, our good friend Doc Miro is going to continue until his death in 1938 to be the unquestioned political boss of St. Bernard Parish, kind of dictatorial, as we talked about, going back to the discovery of Louisiana itself, and with the French and Spanish, the kind of strong king system, it tended toward not really the representative democracy approach like the rest of America, but very strong executives, as the kings in Europe, down to the governors in Louisiana, and even to many of the parishes where the executive was very, very strong. We had old regulars of Middle St. Bernard up to about the 1920s, 1924, and then Doc Miro is going to take over and kind of shift the power to Upper St. Bernard. So that's going to continue to 1938. When he dies, he's going to develop a strong relationship that I mentioned of Upper St. Bernard to both the state and the nation. And so an example of that is this alliance with Huey Long. Huey Long is going to have a similar alliance. That's how Huey Long was known even in the pages of the New York Times as the dictator of Louisiana.
Yeah.
And so this was, remember, this is the 1930s. It seems like the American model is broken. You have a dictatorial model in Europe, Hitler, Nazism, Mussolini, fascism that seemed like it's working much better. And but Huey Long is doing that in Louisiana, but not for the elites, which is a big change. He's kind of a dictator for the average person. And so that Huey Long, virtually every crowd that I'm in, it's 50-50, good or bad, and very passionately felt on each side. So that's going to be, but his power, he was able to maintain that power by having these alliances with the bosses of the different parishes. And in St. Bernard Parish, of course, has Doc Miro. So we'll see that up until the early part of it, so the elections, and this always humored me, because even statewide, the manipulation of elections in era after era after era is always so much more extreme, and that's, I think, better in St. Bernard. And so my example was between, Doc Miro and Huey Long would just discuss what they want done with votes and that kind of thing. And so in one election, there were 8 long-back candidates in St. Bernard Parish, and the cumulative vote total for those 8 on-back candidates was 25,516 votes to 0. And then,
And how many people were there actually?
you know, we don't worry about little technicalities like that. But the best part of this was kind of long called up Dr. Miro and said, wait a second, I thought we had talked about this, and you said that each of the opponents would get 2 votes. And then apparently Dr. Miro said they changed their mind. Anyway, so in air out there, you see similar kind of thing. So brazen, at least I almost admire it because there's just no doubt about it all. But also, same kind of alliance with New Orleans, the power structure there, talking about all the elite power structure. So the Great Depression hit New Orleans badly, of course. And in fact, so one of the big things in the Great Depression we talked about were the banks, and they had depositors' money, there were no protections, they went bankrupt, average people lost all their money, all that kind of stuff. So there was a banking holiday where Franklin Roosevelt said all banks were shut for 4 days to allow confidence to be built in the banks so they could somehow survive and reopen. In New Orleans, only one of the banks survived that bank holiday and reopened as the same one, and that was the Whitney Bank. All the rest of the banks, Canal Bank and Trust, others, essentially went bankrupt. Because remember, it was the Great Depression, but it was on the heels of that 1927 flood and other stuff. And Dr. Miro sat on the board of directors of the Whitney Bank. Right? So there are close connections with all this. And you also see that another big thing is 1939, which is the St. Bernard Courthouse, which we see the current St. Bernard Courthouse. So even though Dr. Miro was going to die in 1938, the power was put in place using a lot of this federal money, this federal government money, the New Deal type money, to build the new courthouse. So construction was going on from 1936 to 1939. Based on our story, but remember, went over again and again, that the courthouse was more than just the building. That was symbolic of the seat of pretty much all political power, up and down. So back when the Middle St. Bernard had the old regulars in place, the old St. Bernard Parish Courthouse was symbolic of that. That's where the power was. Now we talk about, starting from the 1924 election, the power was shifting to Upper St. Bernard in a different faction led by Dr. Miro. And so this courthouse was a symbolic representation of it, and it was very important to do that. So it was really Dr. Miro saying, this is where the power is now. Kind of interesting that, construction started in 1936, so there's no doubt, but there's another one of our good St. Bernard elections about whether to move the parish courthouse from the old St. Bernard Courthouse, St. Bernard Village, to the new place. And it was held in August of 1938. And so the vote total, you might be surprised, that the vote total to move the courthouse was 1,360 to 5. And you know good and well that everybody in Middle St. Bernard would have voted not to move it, right? So, of course, it was moved, and this was a Works Progress Administration project. The designer of the courthouse was the same person who designed the capital of Louisiana, the big tall building. And so didn't really matter, but interesting. A lot of this comes from Bill Highland. Bill Highland is very interested and very detailed with architecture, which is not that interesting to me, but I can get all that. It was interesting that apparently the architect designed this after the Grand Temple of Mesopotamia, which was apparently what this guy thought was one of the most beautiful buildings in ancient history. But that seemed very random to me, but interesting nonetheless. There was a courtroom. The courtroom in this courthouse was supposedly the largest in Louisiana when it was built in 1939. So that was interesting. Of course, it's going to continue on to this day, sand flood until 2005. And the old building that we'll talk about later, that is going to turn into a series of schools and still he made use, of course. All right?
Just an architectural note, the new, quote, 39 era county courthouse in Vicksburg is just exactly like that, only they have money. And
Okay,
it's faced with black granite and white marble.
nice.
But it's exactly like that one, only with money.
And
Okay.
the architect-
Yeah,
It's all the
interesting.
same design.
Yeah, so of course, how the New Deal programs work with, so it's a lot of, for the first time ever, it's very controversial. All this federal money is coming to try to get the economy going again. But it really comes down to the states and localities and kind of used like for a lot of slush stuff. And so, or not, but in a good way, you know, to help, a lot of good things came out of it. So yeah, so there'll be a lot of, it wasn't used for private stuff, but like public buildings, canals, roads, for riders, those kind of things. So yeah, so that's interesting that, and I wonder if the same architect
I don't know.
did both, if you would have had the Louisiana, Mississippi had the same kind of kickbacks, they might have done that. All right, so yeah, moving on into the 30s, kind of in Lower St. Bernard, a good time, the rest, very difficult time. That's gonna move then, finally, so when Doc Miro died in 1938, he was succeeded by his first deputy, Celestine Dutch Rowley. And then we're going to see that that's going to form Dutch Rowley with Claude Miro, or Judge Miro, which is Doc Miro's brother, is going to be the new faction. And we're going to talk about what happened in the 1940s about the change in politics. All right, so let's move on then to the World War II era then, the early 1940s in Lower St. Bernard. Once again, this was a very good, this is the high point of Lower St. Bernard. In fact, in 1940, the population is going to reach 1,000 people. And in 1891, it was about 300. And in 1981, it had 165 residences. So I'm imagining that's 300 or 400 people. All right? So this was a very prosperous time. The disruptive forces of World War II and modernity coming in are going to happen, but not yet. Not during this time. All right? So the 1941, so these intrusions of modernity that I'm saying, so 1941 was the first time electricity came to Delacroix, which was the first time refrigerators came, and all the things that came with it. And so of course, the road had been built, trapping was still good, Spanish was still spoken, generally even by the younger people who kind of assimilated a little bit more. It was known very honest group, good credit, tight-knit community, all that kind of stuff. So it was a good time. What I was fascinated by is that what they were most known for were the dances. In this very small, kind of what I consider rough and tumble, self-sufficient, live off the land community, there were at least 3 dance halls just in Delacroix. And I think there was one in each of the other little communities as well. And just very complicated social life around these dance halls. Apparently there were the Isaac Peterson band and Papa Celestine's band would come down. They'd drive down, I guess New Orleans, I don't know if there's music come down there. They'd drive down on the back of a truck and play on the way down. So everybody knew, and all these communities knew, that they'd be down there. People would come from New Orleans to Delacroix to go to these dances. They would, it cost $1 a couple to get in, and the 3 dance halls were owned by Tony Malero, Vincent Fabra, and the Mellery brothers. And so they're all gone now at midnight. Little Liza Jane would play, which that would be the last dance, but they'd pass the hat, and if they made enough money, they'd play for 3 or 4 more hours. Right? There would be the 3 dance halls that worked together, and so each dance hall would have a dance on every 3rd Saturday. So there was not the competition. Of course, there'd be food and all that kind of stuff. Apparently, most of the time would be during shrimping season. So it's a very big deal to kind of come in from being out during the shrimping season for the dances. And there's the worst thing that could happen when there'd be a young teenage son who would be out doing shrimping, and the father would come in but would make the son stay out, you know, and not be able to go find his girlfriend, do all that kind of stuff, because it's most of the boys who were out doing that. So that was like the worst thing that could happen to the young man. But apparently there were, you know, very respectful, and there weren't fights and all that kind of stuff. And it was, you needed, young men and women needed permission to do it, and the dances were communal, and that kind of thing, obviously men and women. And I couldn't tell exactly, but apparently they kept going until there was something that happened where somebody died, or there was some fights or something like that, and then they kind of continued off. But then also I noticed that, I couldn't get any pictures of those, but that apparently while the dances were communal with men and women, that the bar rooms were men only. So probably not surprising, I think I was able to get a picture of a bar room, so just to show the social life. So also, as I might have mentioned, Christmas
55.
was a huge celebration. Christmas was right in the middle of tracking for
65,
people to
sorry.
leave. So they came back in for Christmas for 3 or 4 days. Hard, constant work and I guess deprivation came in. It was good. The families came. Liquor and wine were sold 2 to 3 weeks in advance. Cooked for several days. Of course, have all the traditional Spanish dishes that at least in the Pasas Fiesta and all those you hear about today. And just so you know, from an outsider of all these things, that most of it I'll get, but I never get the melatonin.
Melatonin.
You know, the stuff melatonin and all that, it's just, that mystifies me. All the rest of it, I absolutely understand, but I don't know, that was just interesting to me. And so why the melatonin would be like a good tasting thing. Anyway, so, but also during the trapping season, other social things, the delivery of groceries was a big deal because it break the drudgery and it offered the alcohol in advance. Another interesting thing, just a social thing, was that apparently during World War II started the walk to the San Pedro Church, which is in Reggio de San Pedro Mission after the Seasons moved, where the people would come from the different communities, like Hosky, Delacroix, and others, the different ones, because they were separate, they all had their own kind of character, and that they would carry a cross of 2x4s and say prayers. And if I'm not mistaken, that continued for a long time, not even continued, I don't know. But that tradition, I'd read about that tradition as well. All right, and so in addition to trapping, like I say, with the distinct communities, different areas were kind of known for different of the occupations. Though, of course, I'm sure there's a lot of mix elsewhere. For alligator hunting, apparently that was centered in Delacroix, and the alligator hunting season was September and October. Back then, it kind of gave way to the trapping. But I was fortunate enough that I actually went alligator hunting with, apparently there was a resurgence in the 1980s, but I went several years ago with actually the father of our current chancellor, Tina Tenney. Her father is Mully Malero, if anybody knows him. That same kind of thing. It was an interesting, fascinating, it was almost more alligator fishing, I guess, because they'd leave out the cords with the chicken or whatever that they bite and get caught and everything. And so, of course, we used used rifles, 22s, to kill the alligator which you got on board. But it was the kind of thing where I've never done this before. I'm interested. Get these. They told me, yeah, why don't you get to kill them? But you have to shoot this very narrow part at the back of the skull, or if you don't and you wound them, I mean, we can really get hurt. No pressure. Right? And so they just gave me the gun, and they get this huge alligator on board. And then it's like, it's a very specific thing to try to shoot just that little part under this pressure. I did it somehow, so it was fine, but anyway. So it's a very interesting thing, but I did note that, so in the alligator hunting, it was a fairly similar process. The best I could tell, except with the gas boat motors, except for, they talked about back in the old days, they would kind of, with alligators, they do it where they get out of the boats a lot of times, just into the bayou, and they kind of set up mud banks in a V, and they'd have the alligator kind of come towards them, and they'd kind of grab a hold and do it with an axe, or with a pick or something like that, a hatchet or a pick, which that sounded like that was a much more manly way to hunt alligators than I did. it was very interesting. Also, about the same season was moss gathering, which was apparently a very big, centered in Reggio, a very big industry as well. Apparently, the same September, October before the traffic started. Apparently, the moss was used by furniture makers
Yeah.
and all that. So, very, very interesting with that. But the cold weather, so not surprisingly, the great prosperity. So the trapping was the big deal, but that's only a few months. Each of the different seasons, you know, the big shrimping and all those, and crabbing apparently could be at any time. And so even though it'd be in different seasons, there'd be this very prosperous work the entire year round. You know, so a very prosperous time. All right, so, and as I'm going through, I don't really have rose-colored glasses that this non-modern or leaning away from modernity society had its very good points, but its very bad points as well, you know, as did both types of society. And so there's one of those, the very good thing, I guess, that Delacroix kids are going to be very much connected to the land as their parents were. And so I would say one of the bad parts of that, at least from a later generation, a later chapter, is almost the lack of formal schooling. So we'll see that you had to go to school between the seasons. And if you have, especially trapping season, when you go this far off, say from November to end of January or something, you're not going to school at that time, so you've got to hit this when you can. I'm also, what I hear stories about as well, is that at the schools that kind of forced the kids through punishment to speak English, not Spanish, and so that was a little controversial. There's a lot of, in the changing of societies is, which is better to do. That's a historical thing in America too, and all that. But it was, at this time, absolutely, the lack of book knowledge was not considered a handicap at all. In fact, and rightly so, it was almost a detriment to get the book knowledge. You're away from making money. The book knowledge is not going to do you much good in the traditional occupations. And so we're going to see, and that lasted in Louisiana as well, pretty much up through the 50s and maybe even to the 60s, where a formal education, you can make the argument, was not the best way for what we call a middle class lifestyle. That changed really in the 1970s, but at this time it was good. And like I mentioned, that most of the kids did not speak English until the first grade, when some of them went off to schools. And these villages have not really changed that much. This kind of subsistence culture had not changed that much since the 1800s. And as I mentioned before, it's kind of crazy that both sides of the bayou, east and west, went 3 and 4 houses back, so way back. So the land laws had a big effect on all that. And I don't know why I like this, but so apparently back then and even onward, they consumed enormous amounts of coffee. And I could definitely understand that. With that lifestyle, that was a big thing. And so I could fit into that part of it. And then it was just interesting that in 1942 to 45 was set up the Shell Beach anti-aircraft training base in Shell Beach, just for training people in the war. And then apparently I hear stories about that Russians were trained there as well, because they were our allies. And that there are some people have stories about the different nationalities there, and that people are still finding the ordnance. I guess they shot it out, and so all that's still being recovered. We've heard about all that. All right. So then the Middle St. Bernard, so the high point, so the 1940s was the dance hall era, was known the high point of Lower St. Bernard, and it's a good time for it. Middle St. Bernard really continued to not be that prosperous, or at least what action is. There's going to be the first real movements at this time. The mainstay is going to still be truck farming as the main occupation. Though a lot are going to, most maybe are going to move for the so-called day jobs, at least the seasonal jobs in manufacturing, which is going to boom in New Orleans and probably in the ports as well. Because with World War II, huge increase in employment opportunities. So go for that. So yeah, I mentioned that the population is just over 7,000. These intrusions in modernity. And for this very odd story that apparently the pump stopped working was pumping water to Bayou Terrebonne, and so the current stopped. But then then in August, and so it got stagnant again. But in August of 1943, it was fixed again. So the pump starts going again, and the story ends there. I've actually looked. I could find no more. I was dying to know what happened. How long did the pump work? And no telling. So it didn't really work too much longer. Excuse me, I'm guessing. And then in Upper St. Bernard, same kind of thing. Prosperity is going to come back. There's going to be an increase in industrialization in the 1940s. And so that's going to be a good thing. As far as the politics, so what happens then, we're going to continue this, you have these political machines that get power, but when somebody dies, so the Doc Miro political machine is out, there's a little period of chaos while the different factions are vying to get there again. So up through 1945 then, it was kind of unsettled and chaotic. These two factions are vying for power. On one side is going to be Dutch Riley, who's sheriff, and then backed up by Claude Miro, who's the Jesuit brother of Doc Miro. And on the other side is our good friend Leander Perez. Remember, Doc Miro was his mentor. Leander Perez is based out of Plaquemine Parish, and he's the boss and he controls Plaquemine Parish as a dictator, but he's the district attorney over both parishes. All right, so it's one district. So he needs to control St. Bernard as well. He didn't after Doc Miro, and so in the 1940 election, where sheriff is the key office for doing this, Dutch Riley is going to win that election against the Leander Perez back candidate trying to get power. And one of the craziest things in politics, Manuel Malero ran for sheriff, backed by Leander Perez. So if you remember the great almost war that happened around the Trappers' War between Perez and Malero, the two sides, that apparently made up and were politically together by the time of 1940, but they did lose. So Rowley and Miro is going to continue to have power in Upper St. Bernard. Leander Perez, however, did pretty much was an early supporter of Huey Long and pretty much saved Huey Long as governor and was credited with that. So Leander Perez is going to have great power through Huey Long through the state. He's going to continue to try to get power in St. Bernard as well, and in the next chapter he's going to get it. And he's going to essentially control St. Bernard politics up until the 1960s after this government. So we're going to say, and part of that is Judge Miro will be impeached because Leander Perez has control of a lot of the law, the trial type side of things, and Miro's going to be impeached for running a divorcement, which is interesting. So, but it wasn't. They did a lot of bad things they could be impeached for, but this was just something that this is Leander Perez trying to gain power, which he had to do. All right, and then finally, we'll see that in the whole land and hurricanes part. As I said, not anything major going on. Always a little bit, no major hurricanes. One big thing for the rest of our story, though, in the 1930s, is really going to get going the oil canal, the making of canals through the marsh, and the dredging in the search for oil. So we're going to see that even way back when, in this very difficult relationship between kind of Islamers and oil and all that, the oil companies are going to tear up the marsh, especially looking back at marsh buggies and all that stuff, and they crush the muskrats and do great damage to the marsh itself. And that's going to continue on and be a big part of our story in the upcoming chapters as well, for the oil companies doing that, but at the same time provides royalties and jobs, and even Isleños, the trappers and fishermen and all those are going to greatly appreciate the canals, cutting off a lot of travel time and that kind of stuff. So this crazy kind of dual relationship really gets going in the 1930s as the oil business gets going well, and that's going to continue on. Very big deal is going to be later. We touched on it after 1927 flood. The federal government is going to take over legislation like for river management, and especially what's going to be called the Jadwin Plan. And this is one of the, it slipped under the radar, but it was called maybe the greatest engineering feat the world has ever known to control the rivers up and down. One of the greatest expenditures the federal government has undertaken besides World War II, and it didn't get any fanfare. Most people were against it in the Congress when it was pushed through, but it got through anyway. But that's going to shape everything that happened from now on. So that's going to be a big deal. And then very quickly, the hurricane of August 1940, it didn't necessarily affect Lower St. Bernard or St. Bernard very much, but it did. It was a fairly minor hurricane, but then it was followed with huge rainstorms, especially in southwest Louisiana. And I saw it all over Louisiana for days. One place called Miller Island, which I don't know that, reported 37.5 inches of rain, like in just a very short time period. So it's kind of a huge amount of flooding, even more than 1927 crevasse in southwest Louisiana. But the big deal for us was it is going to release the nutrient. Nutrient had been brought over to Avery Island, McElhaney, and I've heard other stuff from Islangos, but the story goes, brought over for the fur, it's going to escape in this hurricane and start its progression to take over the marshes. And of course, that's going to be a big deal later on with us with the nutrient. And then also, the whooping cranes were apparently endangered already, and this hurricane is just going to wipe them out to the point the last whooping crane died in 1927. But this hurricane itself pretty much decimated and was the final straw. I think that's enough.